The twisted wreckage glowed orange as flames licked at the crumpled hood, their angry tongues reflecting in Naomi Walker's dark, steady eyes, even as her breath fogged the chilled night air that wrapped around the lonely stretch of highway. The heavy scent of burning rubber and scorched metal filled her lungs as she moved, her boots slipping on the loose gravel of the embankment. She descended without hesitation. Sparks erupted from where the wrecked black sedan had gouged the earth, its front end twisted grotesquely around the base of a splintered oak tree that stood silent sentinel, bearing grim witness to what had happened. Most drivers might have slowed, maybe even stopped, but remained at a safe distance, their fingers trembling as they dialed 911, telling themselves it was too dangerous to get close. But Naomi had not hesitated, not for a moment, because hesitation was not part of her character, not after what life had already taught her, that safety is often an illusion, and sometimes the only way to truly live is to act, even when your hands tremble and your heart pounds against your ribs like a drum signaling retreat. In the dim halo of her hazard lights, still flashing on the road above, Naomi crouched near the wrecked sedan, her breath shallow now, the heat from the flames searing the exposed skin of her arms, making her jacket smoke faintly as the fire's greedy hunger threatened to swallow the entire car. Through the cracked and spider-webbed windshield, she saw a man, mid-30s, his once pristine navy suit bloodied and torn, his face slack, his forehead bleeding, his chest still rising but barely, shallow breaths betraying his fragile hold on life. A voice inside her whispered that she could wait, that help would come, that this was too much to take on alone. But Naomi silenced that voice, as she always had from the moment 5 years ago when she had fought off 2 armed men in her college apartment, swearing to herself she would never again freeze in fear. Her hand tightened around the tactical knife she kept in her glove compartment for situations just like this, the steel cold and reassuring in her grip as she smashed her elbow into the driver's side window, the glass exploding outward and slicing a shallow line across her forearm that she barely felt. The door was jammed, crumpled beyond use, so she ran to the passenger side, throwing her shoulder against it as she prayed for a miracle, and it opened with a groan, just enough. She crawled inside, smoke stinging her eyes, each breath painful, her heartbeat loud in her ears as she sawed the seatbelt free. The man was heavy, dead weight, and her muscles strained as she pulled him across the seat, his blood smearing the upholstery and soaking into her sleeves, the heat growing unbearable as the flames cracked glass and curled the dashboard into blackened ruin. Her mind narrowed to one thought. Not today. As she dragged him backward through the door, each foot of distance gained a fight against gravity and fear. She reached 20 feet away, then 30, just as the gas tank erupted behind her in a thunderclap of fire and metal that knocked them both flat onto the cold dirt, her body instinctively curling over his, shielding him from the falling debris. When Naomi lifted her head, her back singed and trembling, she felt his chest rise beneath her cheek, a slow but steady breath that told her what she already knew in her bones. He was alive because she had refused to leave him. And for reasons she could not yet explain, that mattered more to her than anything else in the world at that moment. The sirens were distant but growing louder, their wails weaving through the cool night air as Naomi sat beside the unconscious man whose life she had just pulled back from the brink. The grass was damp beneath her knees, dew already settling as the flames behind them cast a flickering glow across the wreckage and their bodies, like some infernal reminder of how close death had come. She gently wiped a smear of soot from the man's forehead, careful not to press too hard against the bleeding cut just above his brow. His skin was pale beneath the grime and blood, but his chest rose and fell now, slow and shallow, yet determined. In that fragile rhythm she recognized something familiar, the will to survive, even when the odds seem stacked against you. His eyelids fluttered and Naomi leaned closer, brushing a loose curl of her hair away from her face as she tried to peer into those half-open, unfocused eyes. His lips moved, cracked and dry, the words barely a whisper, carried more by breath than voice. She leaned in until her ear was almost against his mouth, catching the fractured sentence that slipped from his lips like a secret meant only for her. "It wasn't an accident." Naomi froze, her pulse quickening, a chill creeping across her skin that had nothing to do with the night air. The man's head lolled weakly against her shoulder, his breathing ragged but steady, and his next words emerged faintly, each syllable broken and strained but unmistakable. "Victor wanted me dead." A name, a declaration, a shadow falling over everything she thought she understood about what she had just witnessed. Naomi's mind raced as she replayed the scene, the car swerving violently, the erratic jerks of the wheel, the sudden veer off the road, as if it were being dragged by invisible hands into destruction. The flames continued to dance in the darkness behind them, but now they seemed less like the accidental result of a crash and more like evidence of a crime, deliberate and premeditated. She pressed 2 fingers gently against his neck, feeling the thread of life pulsing there. Fragile, but real, and something shifted inside her, an old resolve stirring from the depths of her being. The same resolve that had once carried her through terror when knives flashed in her college apartment and no one had come to help but herself. By the time the paramedics arrived and their flashlights cut through the shadows, Naomi had already made her decision, even if she couldn't yet articulate it. She told them calmly what she had seen, the crash, the flames, the rescue. But she said nothing of his whispered words, keeping that small truth close, holding it like a key she didn't yet know where to use. As they lifted the man onto a stretcher and bore him up the embankment toward the waiting ambulance, Naomi rose slowly to her feet, brushing dirt and glass from her jeans, her gaze lingering on the wreckage one last time. He wasn't just a stranger pulled from a burning car anymore. He was part of a puzzle now. A mystery threaded through with betrayal and danger, and for reasons she couldn't quite name, Naomi Walker knew she was already involved, caught in a story that was only just beginning. The hospital air was heavy with antiseptic and exhaustion, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a stark, clinical glow that made the place feel suspended outside of time. Naomi Walker sat quietly in an orange vinyl chair near the corner of the room, her hands folded in her lap, the scratches on her arms stinging faintly, but her mind far from her own injuries. Across the room, Daniel Cross lay in the hospital bed, his face pale but peaceful, a fresh white bandage wrapped around his head, an IV snaking down to his wrist. Machines beeped steadily beside him, but it was not the medical reassurance that anchored Naomi to that spot. It was the memory of his whisper, barely audible, raw and fractured, yet unmistakable in its meaning. "Victor wanted me dead." She could have walked away. She could have let the professionals handle it, could have compartmentalized what happened as a tragic accident and resumed her carefully constructed, quiet life back at Morrison & Associates, combing through spreadsheets and transaction histories from behind her orderly desk. But that single name, Victor, rang in her mind like a bell, sharp and persistent, and it had awakened the part of her that could never turn away from injustice. Her phone sat on the table beside her, dark and silent, but her mind was already cataloging questions, making silent lists, seeing patterns where others might not. The skill set she honed for years, a sharp eye for inconsistencies, an almost obsessive need to follow digital trails until they revealed their hidden truths, had kicked into gear the moment she heard those words slip from his bloodied lips. She rose and crossed the room, standing near the side of his bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, and felt a flicker of resolve solidify inside her. When he stirred, his eyes fluttering open, the confusion clouding his gaze slowly giving way to recognition, Naomi was ready. "You're awake," she said softly, leaning forward just enough so he could see her face clearly, her voice calm but carrying a quiet strength. "You—" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "You pulled me out." "Yes," she nodded. "You're safe now, but, Daniel, you said something out there. Do you remember?" He frowned slightly, wincing as he adjusted himself on the bed. "Victor," he murmured finally. "Victor Delgado. My business partner." Naomi sat carefully at the edge of the chair nearest his bed, leaning in just enough to ensure he could hear her without strain, her words steady but deliberate. "You said he wanted you dead, Daniel. Why?" His gaze dropped for a moment, his fingers trembling slightly as they rested on the coarse blanket. "There's money missing," he confessed quietly, the admission weighed down by fatigue and fear. "Millions, gone from company accounts. I confronted him and that night on the road, I think he sabotaged my car." The truth of his words settled heavy between them, their shared understanding now irrevocable. Naomi didn't speak immediately, but when she did, her voice was firm and without hesitation. "Then we're going to find out exactly what he did. I'm going to help you, Daniel. I know how to look where others don't, and I promise you this, I'm not walking away." Outside the hospital window, dawn crept softly over the city skyline, pale light spilling across glass and concrete, but inside that quiet room Naomi Walker was already bracing herself for a darker journey. A journey that had already begun the moment she stepped out of her car and ran toward the flames. Lock Technologies occupied 3 pristine floors of a steel and glass tower downtown, its marble lobby and polished chrome fixtures giving the illusion of permanence and security, an illusion Naomi Walker could now see straight through. As she stepped from the elevator onto the executive floor, she moved with quiet precision, her polished navy suit and understated heels a deliberate costume, the leather briefcase in her hand not just a prop, but a tool. Beside her, Daniel Cross walked slowly but with purpose, the fresh bruises on his face a stark reminder of how close he had come to being silenced forever. His eyes flickered with unease, but he nodded politely to staff as they passed, playing his part well, as they had agreed. Naomi could feel his tension beneath the calm exterior. After all, this was his company, his life's work, and every step they took was a step deeper into enemy territory. "Victor's office is just ahead," Daniel murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Through the transparent glass walls, Naomi could see Victor Delgado. Sharp suit, polished shoes, the easy charisma of a man who had long mastered how to win trust while quietly extracting every advantage. He was smiling on a call, exuding warmth and confidence, but Naomi's trained eye caught the stiffness at the corner of his mouth, the cold calculation behind that easy grin. Victor ended his call as soon as he noticed Daniel approaching, rising from behind his sleek desk with open arms. "Daniel, you're back already. I thought you'd be recovering for days." His voice carried genuine concern, or at least a perfect imitation of it. "I'm fine," Daniel replied smoothly, though Naomi sensed the tension in his jaw. "Just a few meetings I couldn't delay." Victor's eyes slid to Naomi, appraising her carefully. "And you must be—" "Naomi Walker," she interjected, extending her hand firmly. "I'm here on behalf of Morrison and Associates. Mr. Cross invited me to discuss some compliance matter." "Ah," Victor said, his smile widening slightly but never quite reaching his eyes. "Always good to be thorough." The exchange was brief but telling. Naomi felt the flicker of suspicion behind Victor's polished facade. He was watching her closely, weighing her, assessing threats the way predators always did. The boardroom was ready when they entered. Sleek and impersonal, with a long mahogany table polished to a perfect shine. Sarah, Daniel's assistant, had prepared the materials as instructed, smiling politely but stealing nervous glances between Daniel and Victor, her allegiance unclear. As the board members filed in, Victor took his place at the head of the table, papers neatly arranged before him, his expression perfectly calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "I've uncovered financial irregularities I feel obliged to share before they become a crisis." Naomi sat silently beside Daniel, heart steady but mind racing. The trap was being laid, and Victor believed he controlled the narrative. She let the moment unfold, watching carefully, knowing their time to strike was close. The performance was flawless, Victor's voice steady, his evidence meticulously prepared, his accusations subtle but deadly. He spoke of unauthorized payments, unexplained transactions, signatures matching Daniel's hand. The board members shifted uncomfortably, suspicion turning their faces into masks of polite concern. Victor's trap was working perfectly, or so he thought. But Naomi Walker sat quietly, her briefcase resting on the polished table, and inside it lay something Victor did not yet realize. The truth that would dismantle his story, expose every lie, and pull the polished floor right out from under him. The air in the boardroom was heavy now, weighted by suspicion, manufactured concern, and the smooth cadence of Victor Delgado's voice as he painted Daniel Cross into a corner with meticulous ease. Naomi Walker felt the tension tightening around the polished table, a coil winding tighter with every passing sentence. Victor's spreadsheets projected crisply onto the screen, his tone measured as he recited dates, amounts, and vendor names that didn't exist. Each detail perfectly curated, designed to leave the board with only one inevitable conclusion: that Daniel, their once trusted CEO, had betrayed them all. But Naomi was not watching Victor's presentation. She was watching Victor himself. His micro-expressions, the way his fingers drummed faintly when a figure was questioned, the flicker of something darker behind his polished smile when one board member asked why all the irregularities fell just under the approval threshold. When Victor reached his final slide, a damning chart showing millions siphoned through fake vendors, all eyes turned toward Daniel, some filled with pity, some with guarded outrage. Daniel sat rigid, his hands folded in front of him, his bruised face a mask of outward calm but with a storm simmering just beneath. Then Naomi leaned forward, her voice quiet but cutting through the murmurs with scalpel precision. "Before you draw your conclusions," she said, "I think the board should see something else." All eyes swiveled toward her, a stranger in this room of suits and subtle hostilities, but her gaze did not waver. With a steady hand, she opened her briefcase, connected her device to the projector, and within seconds, Victor's polished narrative was replaced by a different kind of presentation. The real records, the untouched logs from the company's server, and, most damning of all, a series of emails Victor had believed deleted forever. "Richmond Consulting," Naomi said, tapping one of the files on screen, "does not exist. Neither do half the vendors on Mr. Delgado's list. But what's more telling is that all payments to these fake companies were authorized not by Daniel Cross, but by Victor Delgado himself, using Daniel's credentials after manipulating access controls." Gasps filled the room, but Naomi wasn't finished. With deliberate calm, she displayed the recovered email from Victor to Robert Chin, outlining the entire scheme and even referencing plans to accelerate Daniel's removal. Victor's face, so expertly controlled until now, cracked. His smile faltered, his fingers curling into fists as he realized the boardroom was no longer his stage, but his trap. "Victor," Daniel said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. "You tried to kill me, didn't you?" For a heartbeat, Victor hesitated. Then the truth emerged, bitter and sharp. "You were asking too many questions, Daniel. You left me no choice." A collective shudder moved through the room. Naomi could almost feel the shift as trust fractured and fell away, replaced by something colder, something that would not protect Victor anymore. But Victor wasn't finished. His eyes narrowed, his voice lower now, dripping with venom and something else. Fear. "You think this ends here? You have no idea who you're really up against. This isn't just about me. There are people above me. People who don't forgive or forget." He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, but Naomi was already rising too, her mind racing with what that warning truly meant. The board sat frozen, caught between shock and dawning dread. Victor's confession had exposed the rot, but also hinted at deeper shadows, still waiting beyond the polished walls of Locke Technologies. And Naomi Walker knew in that instant that their fight was only just beginning. The evening air outside Locke Technologies felt heavier than it should have, thick with a tension Naomi Walker could sense but not yet name. The streets hummed softly, traffic gliding past with the indifference of a city that never paused for the secrets behind glass walls. Daniel Cross walked beside her as they left the building, his face drawn but determined. Naomi matched his pace, quiet but alert, her mind spinning through what Victor Delgado's last words implied. "You have no idea who you're really up against." They had called the police. Detective Angela Reed, efficient and professional, had promised full protection while they investigated deeper. Yet as Naomi crossed the parking garage to her car, a subtle dread settled in her chest, a whisper that danger was nearer than anyone had admitted. Her fingers were just closing around her keys when she heard it, a soft footfall too close, too fast. Before she could turn, rough hands grabbed her from behind, a cloth pressed hard over her mouth and nose. The sharp scent of chemicals filled her lungs, panic tightening every muscle as she struggled, kicking, twisting, her mind shouting, "No, not like this!" But the world tilted, then faded into darkness before she could cry out. Daniel's panicked voice was the last sound she heard. "Naomi!" When she awoke, the air was stale and cold, her wrists bound tightly behind her, ankles secured, her back against a damp wooden post. A single bare bulb swung overhead, casting harsh shadows on peeling concrete walls. Somewhere nearby, the low moan of waves hinted they were near the docks. But she had no way to know where or how long she had been unconscious. A figure stepped forward from the gloom. Lawrence Knight. A name she didn't know yet, but whose face told her everything. Impeccably dressed, silver hair, cold eyes, and a smile honed for intimidation, he radiated the calm menace of a man who had spent decades pulling strings from the shadows. "You must be Naomi Walker," Knight said smoothly, crouching so that his gaze met hers directly. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble for us in the past few days." His voice was soft, almost kind, but Naomi could feel the steel beneath it. She said nothing, meeting his gaze with the steady defiance that had carried her through every terrifying moment of her life. "You know," Knight continued, "Victor Delgado was sloppy, but we're not sloppy. We gave him a task and he failed, so now it's my job to clean up the mess." He reached out, brushing a lock of her hair behind her ear with chilling familiarity, as if asserting control with even the smallest gesture. "We'll be calling Mr. Cross shortly. I expect he'll come running, desperate to trade himself for you. That's when we'll resolve this. Permanently." Naomi's heart pounded, but her mind remained sharp. Even bound and cornered, she searched the dim room, cataloging every door, every weakness in her restraints. She had learned long ago that fear was inevitable, but surrender was a choice she would never make. Somewhere beyond those walls, Daniel would come for her. But Naomi Walker was already planning how she would help save herself. The wind off the harbor whipped sharp and cold, carrying the faint tang of salt and rust, as Daniel Cross stepped cautiously onto Pier 47, his heart hammering against his ribs. The boards beneath his feet creaked softly, each step a reminder that this was no ordinary negotiation. Ahead, under the dim glow of an old sodium lamp, Lawrence Knight stood with a stillness that radiated complete control, flanked by two men in dark jackets whose casual postures could not disguise the weapons they carried beneath their coats. Beside the black SUV idling at the far end of the pier, Naomi Walker sat on the ground, her hands bound behind her, a thin smear of dried blood on her temple, but her gaze steady, defiant, even now. The sight of her, alive but captive, sent a cold fury through Daniel, but he kept his expression neutral, mindful that every move he made would be scrutinized. "Mr. Cross," Knight called out, his voice smooth as silk but loud enough to slice through the wind. "You've made excellent time. I assume you understand the situation?" Daniel forced his voice to remain calm. "You have Naomi. You've made your point. Let her go and we can talk about whatever it is you want." Knight chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You misunderstand. We're beyond talking. This is about balance, you see. Restoring the natural order after all the chaos you and Miss Walker have created." Behind Daniel, hidden in the shadows, Detective Angela Reed and her tactical team watched from their concealed positions. Radios silent, but weapons ready. Naomi caught sight of one of the glinting rifle barrels peeking from behind a rusted shipping container, and in that instant, she understood what this was. A standoff. Delicate and dangerous, and any wrong move could tip them all into catastrophe. It gestured lazily to one of his men. "Show Mr. Cross that we mean business." The guard reached down, gripping Naomi's arm roughly, dragging her to her feet. The movement was meant to intimidate, but Naomi felt her pulse steady, her mind already racing through the plan she had been rehearsing in her head since they had thrown her in the SUV. In that instant their eyes met, Daniel's and Naomi's, and the same understanding passed silently between them. Now or never. With a sudden, sharp twist, Naomi slammed her heel down onto the guard's instep, drawing a gasp of surprise, then spun her shoulders violently to one side, throwing her weight into his knees. He stumbled, just enough, and Naomi dove sideways, hitting the pier hard but rolling instinctively toward the edge. "Take them!" Detective Reed's voice cracked over the radio, and the night erupted in chaos. Gunshots rang out, sharp and shocking in the cold air, flashes of muzzle fire lighting the shadows as the tactical team broke cover. Knight's second guard went down almost instantly, but Knight himself ducked behind the SUV, drawing a weapon and firing with cold precision. Daniel dove toward Naomi, shielding her with his body as bullets splintered the pier around them. Detective Reed and her officers advanced methodically, their training turning the tide within seconds. Knight fired one last shot, wild and desperate, before a sniper's round found its mark. His shoulder, and he crumpled with a grunt of pain, the pistol skidding from his hand into the darkness. When silence finally fell, Naomi felt Daniel's arm around her, his voice tight with relief. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, breathless but unbroken. "I'm fine." But as Detective Reed moved to cuff Knight, his cold smile returned. Blood seeping through his tailored jacket, but his gaze steady and filled with menace. "You think this is over," he rasped. "It's not over." And Naomi believed him. Morning light crept gently over the city skyline, casting long, golden rays across Daniel Cross's penthouse office. an office that for weeks had felt like a fortress under siege. But today, with Lawrence Knight in custody and locked technologies spared a hostile takeover, the atmosphere felt different. Quieter, yes, but touched with something deeper, a fragile sense of reprieve, shadowed by uncertainty. Naomi Walker stood at the window, a fresh bandage on her forearm where a splinter from the pier had sliced her skin the night before. She cradled a mug of black coffee, its warmth comforting in her hands as she watched the slow movement of traffic below, a city awakening, oblivious to how close it had come to seeing one of its rising companies fall into the hands of men who operated in the shadows. Behind her, Daniel moved deliberately, organizing papers, pausing to reread reports from Detective Reed and the FBI task force that had descended upon Knight's sprawling network in the hours after the standoff. "We bought time," Daniel said quietly, breaking the silence but not the solemnity. "That's all this is, a reprieve." Naomi nodded slowly, sipping from her mug, her gaze still distant. "Knight's words won't leave my mind, Daniel. You think this is over? It's not over." And she believed him. His arrogance had been more than bravado. It had been the confidence of a man who knew how deep the rot went. The FBI's preliminary reports confirmed it. Shell companies, false fronts, offshore accounts, and a constellation of associates and clients whose names no one dared speak aloud. Yet, Lock Technologies would survive. The board had rallied behind Daniel after the truth was revealed, and stock prices were already stabilizing as news spread of Victor Delgado's betrayal and Knight's arrest. But the real battle, the larger battle, was only beginning. Daniel turned from his desk, leaning back against it as he studied Naomi in the soft morning light. "You could walk away," he said, his voice low, almost wistful. "You've done more than anyone could have asked. No one would blame you if you left this behind." Naomi lowered the mug, finally turning to face him fully. "I could," she agreed, her voice calm but resolute. "But I won't." There was no bravado in her tone, only a quiet acknowledgement of something she had known all along. This fight, like the night she ran toward the burning car, was hers now. The skills she had honed over years, scrutinizing data, exposing fraud, were not just professional tools anymore. They had become weapons in a larger war. One she felt compelled to finish. "You're going to rebuild this company," she said softly, stepping toward him, her gaze steady. "And I'm going to stay, to make sure no one ever threatens it from the inside again." For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of what lay ahead settled between them. Not fear, not even dread, but an understanding that vigilance would now define their days. Outside, the city stirred, indifferent but alive, and somewhere in its shadows, Naomi knew, there were still people watching, waiting, planning. But this time, she would be ready.